A secret meeting between Lewis Hamilton and Toto Wolff in Monaco has just been leaked. Want to know what really happened behind closed doors? Stay until the end. You're not going to believe this. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. The night in Monaco had a kind of stillness that felt unnatural, like the city itself was waiting for something. The waves in the harbor barely moved. The air smelled faintly of salt and expensive perfume, and the sound of engines from luxury cars echoed like distant thunder through narrow cobblestone streets. The casino lights glimmered across the bay, but away from the noise and spectacle, behind a side street only locals knew existed, something was happening that would never make the papers, yet would shake the foundations of Formula One. Inside a small hidden restaurant called Le Mirage Bleu, a place so private it didn't even appear on most maps, two men sat across from each other, men whose names had once been inseparable. It wasn't the kind of place billionaires chose to be seen, it was where they went when they wanted to disappear. The interior was dim, lit by flickering candles, the scent of aged wine and polished wood hanging in the air. Jazz played low in the background, the kind of music that made secrets easier to share. And at that corner table, where shadows met the glow of candlelight, Lewis Hamilton and Toto Wolff were face to face again. A waiter who worked that night described the atmosphere as suffocatingly intense. He said Hamilton arrived first, unrecognizable in a black hoodie and worn sneakers, his head slightly bowed as if each step was weighed down by memories. He didn't carry that same energy the world was used to, no swagger, no charm. He was quiet, almost haunted, the look of a man who had been carrying too much for too long. He didn't take out his phone, didn't look around. He just sat there, fingers tracing the edge of the wine glass, eyes fixed on the empty seat in front of him. Then, 15 minutes later, Toto Wolff entered. No entourage, no assistants, just him. Tall, controlled, that mix of confidence and composure that could silence a room. But this time, it was different. The waiter said the moment their eyes met, the air seemed to change. It wasn't the cold distance of two professionals meeting for business, it was something older, heavier. The weight of loyalty, betrayal, respect. Years of victories and tension compressed into a single look. When Toto reached the table, there was no formal greeting, no small talk. Just a long handshake, firm but silent. It wasn't the handshake of a team principal and a driver, it was two people who had lived through battles together, shared triumphs, and endured the fallout of decisions that neither fully understood. The waiter, standing nearby pretending to pour water, said it was like watching two ghosts trying to make peace. They sat down, and the silence that followed was thick enough to feel. Hamilton leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice low but sharp. The words weren't audible, but the tone was unmistakable, the tone of a man searching for truth, for closure, maybe even for a way back. Toto listened, his expression unreadable, eyes fixed on Hamilton's face with that unflinching intensity that had made him both feared and admired in the paddock. From time to time, Hamilton's hands moved as he spoke, gestures small but loaded with emotion. At one point, he leaned closer, the candlelight catching the edge of his jaw, his voice suddenly steadier. Toto said something then, short, direct, and Hamilton froze, blinked once and looked down, as if the words hit harder than expected. Whatever was said in that moment, it wasn't about contracts or cars. It was about trust, loss, and what had been broken between them. The waiter swore he saw something flicker in Toto's eyes, a moment of hesitation, maybe even regret. They weren't fighting, he said. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of conversation that ends friendships or rebuilds them completely. The minutes passed slowly. The glasses stayed half full. Neither of them touched their food. The tension wasn't anger, it was the kind of charged silence that comes when two people know they're standing at the edge of something irreversible. At one point, Hamilton laughed. Not the kind of laugh that comes from humor, but the kind that slips out when words fail. Toto didn't laugh back. He just looked at him, quietly, almost painfully. The distance between them wasn't physical, it was years of unspoken things. Every decision, every argument, every race that turned into something more than just competition. Then, Hamilton's voice softened. The waiter said it was the first time he saw a hint of vulnerability on his face. He leaned back, rubbed his temples, and exhaled, long, slow, deliberate. Toto nodded, murmured something that made Hamilton smile faintly, the kind of smile that belongs to someone remembering who they used to be before everything got complicated. And just like that, the energy shifted. The tension gave way to something else, not reconciliation, but recognition. The acknowledgement that whatever had broken between them wasn't entirely gone. That somewhere, under the politics, the rivalries, and the walls built by years of competition, there was still a bond. When the meeting ended, there was no handshake, no goodbye. Hamilton stood first, adjusted his hoodie, gave Toto one last look, and left quietly through the side door. Toto remained seated for a while, his gaze fixed on the table, as if lost in a memory that refused to fade. Outside, Monaco glimmered as it always did, oblivious to what had just taken place in that hidden corner of its glittering heart. But those who later whispered about it, team insiders, journalists with the right connections, mechanics who had seen too much, knew it wasn't just another private dinner. It was a warning, a signal, a spark. Something had been set in motion that night, something powerful and unstoppable. And in the days that followed, those close to the paddock began to sense it, a shift in the air, a quiet tension building behind every press conference smile. Because when Hamilton and Wolff met again, alone in Monaco, it wasn't nostalgia. It was preparation. They sat tucked away in the farthest corner of the restaurant, where the candlelight flickered just enough to blur the tension in their faces. The place was quiet, discreet, the kind of spot chosen not for comfort but for privacy. Lewis Hamilton arrived first, wearing a dark turtleneck and a long-tailored coat, his expression composed but unreadable. He carried himself like a man who'd spent years controlling every reaction, every word, every emotion, until tonight. Toto Wolff arrived minutes later, his movements precise, his face as serious as ever. When he sat down, there was a stillness between them, the kind that only exists when two men who once built an empire meet after everything has fallen apart. Hamilton ordered a plant-based risotto with truffle, simple yet symbolic, a reflection of the discipline that defined him. Wolff asked for a grilled sea bass, his tone clipped, his mind already 10 moves ahead, like a chess player sitting down to a rematch he never thought he'd have. A bottle of Chateau Margaux 2015 stood between them, its cork pulled with quiet care. It wasn't about the wine, it was about ritual, memory, and respect. The waiter noticed that their voices barely rose above a whisper, but the energy between them was electric, sharp, restrained, and full of something that felt like history trying to rewrite itself. They leaned close, the waiter would later say. They weren't just talking, they were calculating, remembering, rebuilding something invisible. At first, the conversation wasn't about Formula One. It was about the years that had changed them both. Hamilton spoke softly, his words deliberate, his voice heavy with exhaustion that no championship could fix. He told Wolff about Ferrari, about the beauty of the red suit, the pride, the prestige, and the endless loneliness that came with it. He described the constant politics, the battles behind the scenes, the feeling of being surrounded by people who smiled in public but plotted in private. He said it felt like living in a palace with no warmth, the waiter recalled. He said he gave everything, but it was never enough. Not for them. Not for himself. Hamilton admitted he missed what Mercedes had, the structure, the unity, the honesty. He missed the sense that everyone was pulling in the same direction, not competing internally for power. He said that at Mercedes, he never had to look over his shoulder, the waiter remembered. He said it felt like family, not just a team. Wolff didn't interrupt. He sat still, his expression unreadable, his mind processing every word. He knew the man sitting in front of him better than anyone else in the sport, his rhythm, his pride, his vulnerability hidden beneath layers of steel. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but weighted with meaning. "Lewis," he said, "the door was never closed. It wasn't an offer. It wasn't a negotiation. It was an acknowledgement, a truth they had both known but never said aloud." The moment lingered like a spark in the dark. Both men knew that this wasn't just dinner, this was something bigger. A reunion. A reckoning. A quiet declaration that the story wasn't finished. Hamilton looked down, his fingers tracing the stem of his glass. The candlelight reflected in his eyes as he spoke again, more quietly now. He said he still dreamed of Brackley, of the early mornings, the smell of burning fuel, the echo of mechanics shouting over the noise of the engines. He said that sometimes, even when he was standing in the Ferrari garage surrounded by red, his mind would wander back to those silver days, to the calm before the storm, to the unity he'd never found again. He said it felt like a piece of him was still there, the waiter said later, almost whispering. He said that no matter what he achieved, part of him never left. The conversation grew slower, deeper, rawer. They spoke about trust, about betrayal, about the things that fame hides but never heals. Hamilton admitted that he'd changed, that the years at Ferrari had hardened him, but also taught him who he could and couldn't rely on. He said he'd learned to fight alone, but he was tired of fighting alone. Wolff listened, occasionally taking a sip of wine, his eyes narrowing with thought. He told him he understood, the waiter said. But he also reminded him of what they built, and what it could be again. There was a pause. Hamilton smiled faintly, a rare, quiet smile. "You think we could really do it again?" he asked, half teasing, half serious. Wolff didn't flinch. "We never stopped," he replied. For a moment, the years between them vanished. The heartbreak of the split, the controversies, the endless rumors. It was just two men who had once changed the world of Formula One, sitting across from each other, realizing they might not be done yet. The dinner lasted almost 3 hours. The plates were cleared, the wine glasses left half full, the candle burning low. The waiter said it felt like time itself had slowed. When Hamilton finally stood up, Wolff rose too. There was no handshake, no smile, just a look, long, heavy, meaningful. The kind of look that carried 1,000 words neither dared to say out loud. Hamilton walked out first, his steps calm but deliberate. The London air hit him cold and sharp, but for the first time in years, something inside him felt alive again. He didn't look back, but he didn't need to. Wolff knew, and so did he. That dinner wasn't about nostalgia. It was about ignition. About a spark buried for years finally catching fire again. Something had been set in motion that night, something quiet, dangerous, and unstoppable. And when the world of Formula One finally realized it, it would already be too late. Because Hamilton and Wolff, the man and the machine, had just taken the first step toward rewriting history all over again. Toto didn't push him because he knew there was no need. Lewis Hamilton wasn't a man you persuaded, he was a man you ignited. Toto had seen it for years, that sharp intelligence behind the calm, the way Lewis always entered a room already calculating everything. The tone, the silence, the temperature of the air. That night in Monaco, Hamilton was testing him, not with words, but with silence. Every pause, every glance across the table, every controlled breath was a question. Was Mercedes still the team he once called family? Was Toto still the man who'd stood beside him through the storms and triumphs? Or was this just nostalgia dressed up as business? The lights inside Le Mirage Blue shimmered off their wine glasses, the low hum of conversation blending with the faint sound of waves crashing beyond the balcony. Around them, laughter echoed, forks clinked softly, but at their table the air was different, heavier, electric, like two generals revisiting an unfinished war. Hamilton barely touched his food. Toto spoke little. They didn't need to. Between them was a shared history too vast for small talk. 7 world titles, betrayals, miracles, scars, and victories carved into time. When the main course was finished and the plates cleared, the waiter said the energy shifted entirely. Wolff leaned back, adjusted his cufflinks with a kind of quiet authority that only comes from decades of commanding empires, then reached slowly into his jacket pocket. What he pulled out wasn't a document folder or a digital tablet. It was a small worn leather notebook, the same one he'd carried through countless paddocks and meetings, the one where he scribbled strategy notes, lap time deltas, and private thoughts that never made it to press. He flipped it open with deliberate care, tore out a blank page, and smoothed it on the table. No lawyers. No team principals. No PR handlers waiting for approval. Just Toto Wolff and Lewis Hamilton, the architect and the legend. Wolff uncapped his pen and in steady handwriting, wrote a single number, 20 million euros. Then he slid the paper across the table, silent. It wasn't about the money. Both of them knew that. It was about respect. Faith. Redemption. The kind of offer that said, "I still believe in you." Lewis looked at it, unmoving. He didn't smile. Didn't speak. His fingers tapped the edge of the glass as if keeping rhythm with his thoughts. For almost 30 seconds, the world seemed to stop. Then he reached for the pen. His hand didn't tremble. He didn't write his full name. Just 2 initials, LH, small, neat, deliberate. It wasn't a contract. It was a challenge. A signal that the fire hadn't died. The waiter said Toto's expression barely changed. Only the faintest smile, that sharp glint in his eyes that appeared when he knew he'd won something important. He folded the page, tucked it neatly into his jacket, and nodded. No handshake. No toast. Just mutual understanding between two men who had seen too much to waste time on ceremony. Outside, the night carried the sound of luxury. Cars humming down the Boulevard de Moulins, champagne glasses clinking on balconies, the ocean whispering against the rocks. But inside, it felt timeless. When dessert came, a rich chocolate soufflé with a gold leaf topping, neither of them touched it. They were deep in a different kind of indulgence, the future. They spoke quietly but intensely, voices low, words sharp and measured. Hamilton asked about the team, about the morale, the atmosphere, the engineers who'd stayed, the ones who'd left. He wanted to know if Mercedes still felt like Mercedes. Toto told him that after the chaos of 2022 and 2023, the team had rebuilt from the ground up. "We're stronger now," he said. "Hungrier. Wiser. Every failure taught us something. Every defeat made us leaner. This time, there's no room for ego. Only precision." Lewis nodded slowly, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "And George?" he asked, almost casually. Toto's eyes narrowed slightly, not defensive, just analytical. "He's grown," he replied. "He's become a fighter. He's learned what pressure feels like." Hamilton's smirk widened. "Good," he murmured. "He'll need it." The waiter said there was a moment of silence after that, not awkward, but powerful. A mutual recognition. A shared understanding that this wasn't about rivalry or revenge. It was about unfinished business. Then Toto began to talk about 2026, the new era, the hybrid revolution, the reset that would change Formula One forever. He spoke with the conviction of a man who'd already seen the blueprint in his mind. "We're ready," he said. "The data, the simulations, they're stronger than ever. The mistakes we made, they built the foundation of what's coming. We've been silent because silence wins wars. When the new engines come, we'll be there at the top. But it won't mean anything unless you're there too." The words hung in the air like electricity. Hamilton looked down, exhaled, then smiled. Not the public smile, not the sponsor smile, but something softer, more human. "Maybe it's destiny," he whispered. The waiter said he could see the spark in his eyes, the one that had dimmed in recent years. The spark of a man who suddenly remembered what it felt like to believe again. For nearly 3 hours they sat there, the restaurant emptying around them. They spoke about strategy, loyalty, the evolution of the sport. They reminisced about the golden days, about Abu Dhabi 2014, Silverstone 2017, Brazil 2021. Toto reminded him of what they'd built together, how their legacy wasn't just about winning but about changing the game itself. "You're still the greatest," he said softly. "But greatness also knows when to come home." When they finally rose from the table, the clock had long passed midnight. The waiter watched them walk toward the exit, two silhouettes, steady and sure. They didn't look back. They didn't need to. Something had already shifted. The past and future had shaken hands in that dimly lit corner of Monaco, sealed not with ink, but with conviction. And when the waiter cleared the table, he found the soufflé still untouched, the wine glasses half full. But there was something else too. The faint smell of engine oil and burnt rubber still lingered in the air, as if the spirit of Formula One itself had sat there with them, waiting for the next chapter to begin. By the time they rose from the table, the world outside had slipped into that deep suspended quiet that only comes after midnight in Monaco, when the noise of the casinos dies down, the yachts dim their lights, and only the hum of the sea fills the air. The restaurant was empty, chairs turned over, silverware stacked, candles flickering their last breaths. Hamilton adjusted the hood of his dark sweatshirt and moved like a shadow. He didn't rush. Every step was measured, silent, almost rehearsed. The stride of a man who has lived too long under cameras and knows how to disappear when it matters. He didn't look back. He gave the faintest nod to the last waiter by the door, a quiet sign of respect, and slipped through the rear exit that opened onto a narrow alley behind the casino, a place few people ever saw. The alley smelled of salt and asphalt. A matte black SUV waited there with its engine off, tinted windows, no plates visible. The door opened, he climbed in, and in seconds he was gone, the taillights fading into the wet reflections of the cobblestone. Toto Wolff stayed behind, staring at the empty glass in front of him, his mind running faster than any stopwatch he'd ever held. He checked his phone, typed something, hesitated for a split second, then sent it. The screen lit up just long enough for a passing waiter to see one word: done. There was no context, no signature, but it was enough to suggest finality. The kind of word that doesn't end a conversation, it ends an era and starts another. No cameras caught them that night. No journalists got wind of it. The reservation had been made under fake names, and the security footage was mysteriously overwritten before morning. But the staff who were there knew exactly who they'd served. They recognized the tension, the way both men spoke softly but with purpose, the way the air in the room felt heavier when they shook hands. Nobody said a word, but they knew something monumental had been decided. It wasn't just dinner, it was a spark that would set the paddock on fire once the truth came out. A few days later, before the restaurant even opened, a small envelope arrived with no sender listed. It was thick, expensive paper, sealed by hand. Inside was a simple note in perfect handwriting: "Thank you for your discretion." Below it, 2 VIP passes to the Monaco Grand Prix, each embossed with the royal crest. The only clue to who sent it were 2 letters written in dark ink: LH. That was when the whispers began to crawl through the paddock. At first, it was nothing more than hushed speculation in garages and private chats between engineers who knew how to read between the lines. Flights from Brackley to Monaco became more frequent. Technical staff who hadn't been seen together in years were spotted entering restricted areas of the Mercedes factory late at night. A few of Hamilton's old crew members, those who had been part of his legendary run from 2014 to 2020, quietly vanished from their current teams. Their social media went dark, their LinkedIn pages under revision, their names suddenly removed from other rosters. Insiders claimed that something extraordinary was happening inside Mercedes headquarters. A project that had been dormant since 2022 had been reactivated, an internal program known only by its code name, Phoenix. The idea was whispered to be bold and audacious, a machine designed not merely to compete, but to dominate. Every element, every aerodynamic surface, every line of software code was supposedly tailored for one specific driving style. A car not built for the future, but for the return of a legend who understood how to turn machinery into art, who could resurrect speed itself. Hamilton's name was never mentioned publicly, but it didn't need to be. Engineers spoke in half sentences. Strategists avoided eye contact when asked about driver simulations. Data teams worked on telemetry files labeled with initials that didn't match anyone currently under contract. Somewhere deep inside the factory, in the simulator suite that only the most trusted were allowed to enter, a new file appeared one night, Profile 44.01. No one dared delete it. While the press speculated about transfers, retirements, and contracts, those who truly understood Formula One knew that something seismic was unfolding in silence. Red Bull's senior staff suddenly postponed their internal holidays. Ferrari's PR team began preparing special announcements. At McLaren, someone leaked that an unnamed veteran driver had inquired about breaking his contract early, fearing the coming storm. The energy in the paddock shifted. Every whisper seemed to lead back to one idea: Hamilton was coming back. And yet, the man himself said nothing. Not a word on social media. No cryptic quotes. No interviews. He appeared only once in public after that night, briefly, at a charity event in London. When asked about his future, he smiled faintly, that same unreadable expression that had driven rivals crazy for years, and said only, "Sometimes the story isn't over, it's just waiting for the right chapter." Meanwhile, back at Mercedes, the pieces were moving faster. Logistics teams had been told to prepare for a private test under blackout conditions. Engineers worked through the night on what sources described as an experimental hybrid mapping system, built specifically around Hamilton's cornering data from his peak seasons. The new power unit was said to deliver unprecedented torque recovery under braking, optimized for his braking finesse and throttle modulation, traits no other driver replicated with such precision. The man behind the power unit's design was the same lead engineer who had left Formula One for aerospace and returned mysteriously 6 months ago. Rumors claimed that Hamilton's deal, if it existed, wasn't just about racing. It included advisory control over the team's driver development program and a sustainability project connecting Formula One to Mercedes' electric future. Some even whispered about an emotional clause, a single request he had made to Toto, that the new car carry an insignia somewhere hidden, something small but meaningful, the word "Rise" etched beneath the steering column. Then, one night in Monaco, as the sea reflected the lights of the skyline, a sound echoed faintly across the harbor. Deep, mechanical, almost alive. A low, throaty growl that didn't belong to any yacht or sports car. It came and went in seconds, but those who heard it swore they recognized it. That crisp whine of a hybrid engine paired with the bass-heavy roar of raw combustion, unmistakable. It sounded like a ghost from the past. The kind of sound that once ruled the sport. And in that haunting echo, there was something more than noise, there was prophecy. The memory of greatness refusing to fade. The whisper of destiny returning to claim its place. Somewhere in the night, amid the scent of fuel and sea air, the story of Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes was no longer just history. It was beginning again, louder, faster, and more unstoppable than ever.